Hey guys, it's Bridget with San Diego Seed Company, and I am here in my fall garden, and I'm going to turn over some beds and get the garden ready for fall. And when I do that, there are 6 very important things that you need to always remember to do when you transition from summer crops to fall crops, and really from fall crops or winter crops back to spring crops again. Anytime you turn over a season, there's 6 things you want to do. I'm going to name all of those things, but before I get into that, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button so you're notified anytime we put out a video. Okay, so have a look around. You can see my garden is totally out of control. I need to start reining it in and need to start prepping for the next season. We are in September in zone 9 and 10, and that is a prime time to start transitioning into a cool season garden. That means ripping out things like tomatoes that are done, they have given their all. Yes, of course, tomatoes can continue to give all the way through the winter, but their productivity is so low, I don't want to mess around with having them in the garden, and I'm really going to pull them out to make room for season appropriate crops. Anytime I go from a season change, there are 6 things that I do every single time. First thing I do is I rip out the crops that are no longer seasonally appropriate. These tomatoes, look at them. Yes, there's some tomatoes on them. I will harvest them, but they're really done. The plants are scrawny looking. They're kind of burnt up. I don't want to continue to water them. They have insects, and some disease on them. They're done. And their productivity is going to continue to drop because our nighttime temperatures are going to lower and our daytime temperatures are going to get lower as well. The other factor is these only want to grow or will grow the best when the days are long. Our days are getting shorter. We're going into the fall. So these are coming out because I want to make room for broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, spinach, all of my root crops, onions, garlic, potatoes, all of the things that I want to grow in the fall, and I don't want to deal with these anymore. So the first thing you do is you rip them out. Now, there's a couple different ways you can do it, but what I always suggest, especially when you have a really big crop, is that you just chop it at the bottom like this, okay? And the reason why I'm doing that is, 1, it's a great way to make it a little bit easier on yourself if you have a lot to pull out. What you can actually do is come in one day and actually cut all your plants and let them burn up in the sun, and they'll be a lot lighter. In fact, this is what we do on our commercial farm because something with water in it or moisture is going to be a lot heavier, right? And this year we had 700 plants on the farm, which means we need to rip out 700 plants. And instead of ripping out 700 plants that are really heavy, we cut them all at the base, let the sun dry them out, and then it became a lot easier to pull these guys up when they were dried up and all, crispy. It has definitely happened in zone 9 and 10 because our weather is so mild that these guys will actually start sprouting again. They'll sprout at the base and you'll get more, you'll get basically another tomato plant. So if you don't want that to happen, you're going to want to come down here and clip it again really close to the bottom. And that should do it. This is probably going to rot. The reason why I like to clip it at the base instead of ripping it out is I don't want to rip out all of the beautiful, gorgeous organic matter and mycelium and bacteria and all the things that are growing around the roots of this plant and make a big gaping hole where this plant was. The other reason why I like to leave it in the ground is because it's easier. I'm always about doing things that are a little bit easier on your back and on your body in the garden. And it will decompose and actually add more organic matter to the ground. So it's win, 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 win. Pull out the stake. I think my husband must have put this one in. Get rid of this. Okay, where does this go? It doesn't go in the compost. The reason being is because tomatoes are really easy carriers of a lot of pathogens in the garden, diseases, all kinds of stuff. And yes, of course, you could, in theory, compost them if your compost got hot enough, but I can't guarantee that our compost does get hot enough, so I'm not chancing it, so this is gonna go in the trash. I know that's kind of sad. We do have a green bin that the city will take, and they'll take those, but I'm not going to compost it here on the garden because it's not worth the possibility of putting more pathogens in my garden that are potentially on that plant. So I'm going to get rid of them. So I've got my plants out of the garden. You can see here I've already started ripping things out. The next thing I need to do is I have to get rid of the weeds, okay? That's so important. If you let weeds proliferate season to season, which, newsflash, I've totally let that happen here, but do as I say, not as I do, right? Or something like that. Just trust me, get the weeds out because they'll get out of control. We have a really good video about my 3 favorite tools that I use in the garden. This is one of them that I use a lot, and this will help me get down and get the weeds out by shallow cultivation. So I'm doing 2 things here. I'm breaking up the soil, which is important. I'm also helping rip out a lot of the roots of this nutsedge that I have, which is a really terrible weed. And I need to get all of these out. So I will weed all of this area and make sure it's as close to being weed free as possible. Again, that goes in the trash, not in the compost, so that I start with a clean slate. That's always it's a good feeling in the garden, and it's a really good garden hygiene habit to get into, is to weed your garden, especially at the season changes, because during the middle of the season, you're so busy doing other things, sometimes it's impossible to get to weeding. Okay, so number 3 is you need to aerate your soil. This is really important if you are growing in ground in particular. Because in-ground beds, you're walking on them, you're tromping through the garden, you're compacting the soil every time you do that. And even though you may not be walking right where you're going to be planting, you still are compacting the soil, and so the more compacted your soil is, the less ability it has to take on water, which is really important. We have this drip line here, and so where I want to aerate is right next to the drip line, because I want the water to go into the ground very quickly. I don't want the water to pool or spread into the walkways, because then guess what? I'm just watering weeds, which is not what I want at all. There's a lot of different things that you can use to aerate your soil. You can use a broad fork, you can use a pitchfork, you can use a shovel. I like this one because it's what we have on hand. You can really use anything, but the idea is when I run this irrigation, I don't want the water to flow over here where it's a walkway. I want it to go into the ground as quickly as possible. That's going to help reduce the amount of evaporation, because the moisture is going deep in the soil quickly where it's less likely to evaporate. It's going to help you with your weed issue. It's going to do so much, and it's going to allow oxygen into the soil, which is essential for plant roots. So it's going to do a lot more than just help you with the weeds. Number 4, you need to irrigate. So for us, you can tell the soil is really dry right now, and it's really dry because we've been in a season change and everything is puttering out. So I'm not pumping a lot of irrigation water into my garden as the plants are really at the end of their life cycle. We've also gone from March was our last, well, actually we did have rain this year, but that was totally a fluke. But typically our last rainstorm is somewhere in the spring, and we're dry all summer long. So we've had a lot of months of dry weather, and I haven't been irrigating as much, so I know that the soil has got to be pretty parched, pretty deep down in the ground. I need to rehydrate it and get it ready for fall planting. So I'm going to run my irrigation, or if you don't have irrigation, you can hand water, that's fine, but you need to make sure that you hydrate your soil well before planting. So I will actually run my irrigation the week prior to me planting, in particular because in zone 9 and 10, we get crazy hot weather sometimes. It'll be 90 or even 100 degrees plus in September, October, and November in the cool season. So for those plants to thrive, there needs to be moisture in the soil. The other really important thing to be putting in your soil is fertilizer, okay? Now, I did put these in a certain order because it does make sense that you would aerate first. You open up the ground so that water can get in and so that fertilizer can get in. So incredibly important. If I were to not aerate and I irrigate, the water starts to flow everywhere, and then I put the fertilizer down and the fertilizer gets washed everywhere. You're really wasting your time and your energy and your money. You want all of your goodies for your plant roots to be right where the plant roots are going to be, which in this case is right on the drip line. So anytime you're doing a season turnover, in this case it is from summer to fall crops, you're going to rip your plants out, then you are going to weed, then you are going to aerate, so breaking up the soil, then you're going to irrigate, then you're going to put down fertilizer and compost, and then you're going to irrigate again, and that's just to wash all the goodies deep down into the soil. That's really, really important. So number 5 is really amending, because you're putting down fertilizer and compost and anything else that your soil might be lacking, so that your crops have the best chance to thrive. And finally, the last thing that is so important that I love is mulch. Now, a little disclaimer with that is you can mulch any time of the year, and I really encourage you to do it. Anytime you've got extra organic matter in the garden, from an arborist, tree trimmings, anything like that you can use as mulch, I highly recommend it, because the mulch is what makes this beautiful soil that you see here. It's holding in moisture, it's a substrate for mycelium and good bacteria and fungus to grow. It's just an incredible thing to use in the garden. I love mulch. So you can use it now and you can use it throughout the season, but don't forget, particularly right now when it's really hot and we want to keep the roots cool, mulch is your go-to product for that. So that was number 6, which is the mulch in the garden. Now you're ready. You have 6 steps that you need to be the most successful at any season changeover. But in particular, if you're starting your fall garden this year, make sure you do these 6 things so you can be as successful as possible.